This is the I Am A Mainframer podcast, brought to you by the Linux Foundation's Open Mainframe project. Episodes explore the careers of mainframe professionals and offer insights into the industry and technology. Now, your host, Senior Analyst and Vice President of Sales and Business Development at Futurum Research, Steven Dickens.
Hello and welcome. I'm Steven Dickens, your host here on the I'm A Mainframer podcast. And today, I've got the brains behind CBT Tape, Sam Golob, on the show. Hey, Sam, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Steven.
So let's get the listeners and viewers orientated here. Tell us a little bit about you, what you do, and then we'll jump off from there and get into CBT Tape.
Okay, I'm a MVS systems programmer. Now it's called ZOS by trade, and I've been at it for 40 years. And
So you started in kindergarten, Sam. Is that what you're trying to tell me?
well, sort of, but I had to make a living. Had a bunch of kids, and I had a wife and kids, and I had to make a living for them. So I went to computer school, and started somewhere. But I was always very inventive, and I tried to do some things that were a little different. So that was
Fantastic. Well, that's going to make for an interesting podcast. So, where are you a system programmer? What are you working for a particular company? Are you contracting or freelancing at the moment? Where are you?
well. Right now, I'm not really working for a company right now,
Okay.
but I do manage the contents of the CBT tape, which
Fantastic.
which is a tremendous collection of user-written software for systems programmers, concentrating on all levels of the MVS operating system back to the OS 360.
So let's start there. I've heard about CBT Tape. The world thinks about open source. We're obviously part of the Open Mainframe project, but I don't think people give the mainframe the credit it deserves for the history that it's had in the open source community, and almost predating what we think of as open source with Linux and those types of open source communities today. CBT Tape, for me, is one of the classic examples of a community coming together, sharing best practices. But tell us a little bit more about the history of CBT Tape and kind of your role in maintaining that community.
Okay. Well, the thing is, there used to be a lot of collections like this. There was the Michigan Moz tape, and the other organizations or people had collections, because there was always a need to spread the wealth around. If somebody solved a problem for himself or herself, there needed to be a place where it could be uh, given to other people. So there were a lot of collections. There were quite a few. Problem with them is they all died. Either a person lost his job, or they sold the bank, which is what happened with Arnie on the CBT tape originally, because he ran it for 15 years. You should know that the CBT tape has been in existence for 49 years.
Jeez. This is what I mean about the open source community. What we think of as classic open source, and this is a Linux Foundation project, those are kind of 20, 30 years old. Linux is 30 years old now. People kind of think, oh, this is a 30-year-old kind of phenomenon. Mentioning that CBT tape predates that by 19 years, for me, is just crazy. So people were sharing best practices.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, that's the story that's interesting for me that doesn't get told.
Well, the thing about this particular collection is that Arnie Casangino, the guy who started it, was extremely devoted to it, and he was very finicky about details. And he wrote everything up in his documentation in such a clear and thorough way that when I first got I got my first tape in July 1985. I took one look at this and I said, "Wow!" And what happened was, in the subsequent few years, Arnie's Bank, the Connecticut Bank and Trust Company, which gave CBT its name.
That's where it comes from. I've always wondered where CBT came from, but that's okay. So that's the genesis story, is it? Okay, that's good to
Yes,
know.
the Connecticut Bank and Trust Company was bought by another bank, Bank of Boston, which was bought by the Fleet Bank, and uh, they announced their intention of dismantling Arnie's data center in Hartford, Connecticut. And we had about a year and a half lead time on it. And at that point, I was very, very friendly with Arnie, and he was sending me all the recent tapes every time he made one, which was about 15 a year. And we were just very, 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 very good friends. And what we had about a year and a half lead time to figure out what to do to keep this thing going. So I figured out that, well, Arnie needed a lot of disk space to do it his way. But I was able to use some of the tools from the tape tools, and use a system called, like, how do you put this? Old master, transaction tape, new master. So I was able to make a new tape with the new stuff in it and all the old stuff also in it, and I gave it to somebody to duplicate. And since I used to work with an organization called NASPA. I wrote a column for them in their magazine for almost 20 years, and MVS Tools and Tricks of the Trade. And by the way, all my columns are from the magazine, and other things that I've written are on the CBT tape on two files.
Oh, okay. So it's an archive if people want to go back and see those, they can.
They can, and it's also online on our website. The articles are there too. So, in case the reason why I wrote all of these things was because it was hard for me to learn the subject. And
And this is the thing I love about the ZOS and MVS community. The annual conference that was, what was it, last week? I don't know when this episode's going to go
yeah,
out.
yeah.
It's called Share, and it kind of, people don't realize, but it's because people used to share these tapes and share these best practices. That's why it's called Share.
Right. It's what it isn't just the name; it's what we do.
Yeah, and I think people don't give, people don't associate open source with mainframe, and John Murtick, who runs the Open Mainframe project, and I went down this rabbit hole a few years ago. The mainframe community's been doing open source for like 50 years.
Easy,
And people,
more than
yeah,
that, way before my time.
yeah. So we've talked about CBT tape. Great to know where the name comes from. Tell us a little bit, Sam, about what's in CBT tape. I get one of these. I'm assuming it's no longer a physical tape, but I'm able to download this. What's in there? What can I expect? I'm a system programmer. I'm watching this podcast for the first time. I don't know what's in this thing. What is
Okay.
it? What can I expect when I download it? I suppose is the question.
Well, okay. Now, I just want to mention something about vendor products. If a shop is a rich shop, in other words, the first system programming job I had was for a big bank, and they could afford all kinds of vendor software in addition to what IBM gave out. And that one of the things they had was something called Resolve. I think it's produced by BMC now. But in any case, it's a multi-utility that can do all kinds of necessary tasks that a system programmer needs to do. And IBM doesn't supply the real proper tools for it. They supply some tools for it, but they're really not so adequate, and they're not so convenient, for the simple reason that IBM is a software house as well. And their main thrust is producing the operating system. And yes, you need tools to do everything that you need to do when you're maintaining the operating system. But they can't produce tools the way we can produce tools. If somebody needs a tool, they at least they give you the macro libraries, they give you manuals, they give you information how you can find stuff out. There's also stuff they withhold, but we can find it out also sometimes. And we have to struggle to get the tools that we need. So now, if somebody had a problem, it's going to be for sure other people, it's the same operating system, other people are going to have the same problem. So one person managed to write a tool to get around the problem. And if you can get this tool to other people, then they can solve the same problem without having to reinvent the wheel.
So this is almost like predates Reddit, where somebody goes onto Reddit to try and find the answer to something. Somebody's fixed the problem. Somebody's recorded a YouTube video to say, "Hey, I fixed my carburetor in my sort of 1960s car. Here's a video of how to do it." This is almost that, but for mainframe system programming, I think, by the sound of what you're telling me.
Well, it's in a sense it is. The thing is that we just produce the tools, and there's usually instructions that I try to make sure that there are instructions on how to properly install the tools. And as a normally trained system programmer can put this on his own system if the company or the owner of the system will allow it. Sometimes they only want to have vendor software on there, and they can afford to buy it because the vendor has a contract and they support the stuff. And these companies would like the reassurance that their stuff will be covered by a contract and supported. We can't do that. And we do the stuff for love and for fun. And
That's how communities grow, though, Sam. That's how communities grow. That's the thing. I mean, people ask me, why do I do this podcast? I had the fortunate position of I was the person who approached the Linux Foundation to set up the Open Mainframe project back in 2014. So I've kind of got this as my baby. Why do I do this podcast? Because I'm not a coder. I've never been a sysprog. I've not been hands on keyboard, but I want to help this community grow and expand. I can do podcasts. I can help with marketing. I can help with promotion. That's what I can bring to the community. I have fun contributing my time. Can't contribute technically, but I can contribute my time and my skills. And it's fun for me because I get to chat to fun people like you who are genuinely passionate about the community, who've got some, our skill sets are so completely different. But if you look at what we're doing, we're both contributing our time. We're both having fun contributing our time. And we're both moving the community on. Me by giving you a platform to talk about your stuff so more people find out about it. You by doing great work to pull together that tape and provide those tools. This is what community is all about for me.
well, it's the same for me.
Yeah. So we share a common bond, but our skill sets are completely different. That's what
this is the same with all the contributors of the tape.
Yeah.
Because all our skill sets are different. It's a large system. People usually have experience in what problems that their shop
There might
needed.
be a DB2 guy, there might be a Kicks lady, there might be a tape and backup person,
Of
there might be a
course.
DASD person, but you can pull all that together, you get that perspective.
Well, I don't understand everything that everybody contributes. However, Arnie's precedent was what he said was, I just put everything up. I don't try. Well, I try to understand a little more than he did.
Okay. There's a
But
bit of curation. There's a bit of understanding. To put
yeah,
it
well, the thing is, sometimes a person will write something for himself or herself, and it's if you make a mistake in entering something, in entering you enter something wrong on the tool. Okay, so you need error correction. You need something to catch the error. And usually, when somebody writes something for themselves, a lot of times, not always, but a lot of times when somebody writes something for himself or herself, they just assume that the correct things will be entered when you use the program. But what if they aren't? So then the program can blow up. So I consider it part of my job, if I understand what's going on, to check up on that and put some fixes in to make sure that other users who aren't the one who wrote the program will be able to make, if they do something wrong, it's not going to blow them up.
So, Sam, tell me a little bit about. Obviously, this started out as a tape and used to get physically sent around. What's the process now? Where somebody listens to this podcast, where do they go? How do they find out information? How do they download this code? What do
Okay.
they do? Let's spend just a couple of
Well,
minutes there.
our website is called www.cbttape.org, and it was created by my dear friend Sam Newton, and he's the one who pushed for it. It used to be that the tapes were duplicated by NASPA, and then we got the website this way, and it was okay. I don't want to talk politics here,
Let's
but
move
anyway.
on. Politics is never a good subject for a podcast.
I know. In any case, so NASPA stayed on to help us along. But in any case, to make a long story short, the files on the tape are individually loadable if you have an FTP connection to the site.
Yep.
Now, one of our contributors, Lionel Dyke, created on file 43, I think it is. He created a system where if you have a ZOS system that has an FTP connection to our site, you can automatically download every file on the CBT tape instantly. The time it takes for FTP to go grab it and unzip it and unexmit it. I mean, most of the files on the are in zipped transmit format, and IBM created the transmit format back around 1985 for the purpose of sending files from one MVS system to another, and in doing so, they converted all the files, as many as they could, to the card image format. 80 bytes, fixed block records.
So I can go onto cbt.org,
And
download those. Can I
you
get them
download,
onto?
you download the FTP, you download the XMITted file and unzip it, and then you receive it on your system, and you have usually a PDS, a partition data set, which is like a library, and you could look at the members, and they usually has documentation, and it'll show you what to do to install it. It'll show you what you can do. Yeah. There's also another thing that we have to help people out. I think it's file 874, but I'm not sure. There's a file of help members that are mostly in the format of like sys1.help, IBM's help members. But there's a whole library of help members of for tools that are on the CBT tape. It's not completely inclusive. There are maybe a small fraction of the tools that are on the CBT tape, but there's at least 100 help members or something like that. That's enough for people to get started with. And if they look through there and see what the different products do, then they might think of installing something for themselves. And each help member tells you what file on the CBT tape the the product came from.
Well, Sam, that's fantastic. I think that's I mean, the takeaway from this podcast for me is if you're a mainframe system program and you don't know about CBT tape, Go check it out. Absolutely a treasure trove. What are we talking? 49 years worth of best practice put into a website. Sounds like a fantastic place to sort of go and get resources. I could talk to you for hours, Sam, about this. It fascinates me, but I've got to keep us on track here. So we'll pivot now for a moment. A couple of things I ask all the guests, and I've been fascinated to get your perspective on this. I ask these two questions of every guest. You've been on the mainframe for a while. Where do you got the chance to go back, chat to Sam, age 22, coming out of college? You've seen this mainframe platform over the decades. What advice would you give? We've got a lot of younger listeners to the show. What advice would you give to those listeners?
Well, it was different when I started. First of
Mhm.
all, IBM was not so clear in the way they wrote their manual. And when my first system programmer job, which was a couple of years after I started programming, I was an application programmer before. My first system programming job, uh, most of the people would tell me if I had a question, go read the manual,
Yeah.
read the book.
RTFM.
Yes,
RTFM.
yes, read the book. So now, to me, as a neophyte, there were 200 manuals, and to me, it seemed like the correct information was contained in 5 of them. And I didn't know which 5. So that left me without really that much of a possibility of reading the book. So I really learned things one thing at a time. And I don't think that, in answering your question, I think I had to go through that learning process originally, and I don't think I would change too much.
Yeah.
Even, even
The process of the learning is what is the takeaway.
yes, I had to go through the process of learning what I had to learn,
Yeah.
and it was a long, long process, and it's still going on today.
I
And
think that's been a consistent theme, Sam, as I've done this podcast, I don't know, 5 years or so now, is that consistency. Pivoting to my last question, and I'd love your perspective on this. You've got a completely different perspective of the mainframe of some of our listeners, and certainly from my perspective, I'm kind of tracking big market trends and tracking where the vendors are going. You're kind of in the engine room as a system programmer. Where do you see the platform 5 years from now? If you've got a crystal ball and you're able to sort of look through the mists and the mists clear, where do you see the platform?
well, it's kind of hard. Uh,
This question is my favorite question to ask. I know
I
it's not
know
an
that
easy
I've been
question.
told it 12 times already. Uh, the thing is like this. I don't like to do that. What I like to do is to just take it one step at a time. We support, when I'm thinking about it, we support all the levels of the operating system. And the CBT tape goes back a very long way. So if you have an old version of the operating system, say 25 years old, and people are still running them, and you need something to help you at that level, well, we have the old tapes that were written for that level. So you can download that the old tape and look in the. You have to do a lot of work to thumb through it and look to see what you can find. But nevertheless, we support all of that. I've there was
And
one
you
guy.
see that going forward, Sam, as you look 5 years out,
Well,
you see
it's
that
hard.
continuing?
You sometimes you can't predict what's going to go on forward, but you can try to adjust to it as it arrives. That's all I can say about
Well, Sam, this has been fascinating. As I say, I could chat to you for hours. This is a huge topic. I think the key takeaway for me is go look at CBT cbttape.org. Let me get the URL right. Fascinating conversation. You've been listening to another episode of the I'm a Mainframer podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steven Dickens. Please click and subscribe and do all those things to share this with your colleagues and friends. And we'll see you next time for another episode. Thanks very much for watching.
Thank you for tuning in to I Am a Mainframer. Liked what you heard? Subscribe to get every episode, or watch us online at openmainframeproject.org. Until next time, this is the I Am a Mainframer podcast. Insights for today's mainframe professionals.